On the 26th of March, Holy Saturday, in the year 1266, a 10-month-old infant whose Christian name, Dante, has as its Latin root the word giving, was baptized in this building. During his years in Florence, first as a boy, eventually as father of several children, he came here again and again. He saw the same depictions of the afterlife that we see now: Christ in judgment, the kingdom of heaven, and that department of God's will called hell, with its punishing demons and suffering souls. At the solemn and joyful moment of baptism, the Christian families of the baptized were vividly reminded of the end of human life and of their final destination in the afterworld. The first 36 years of Dante's life were spent, with only brief interruptions, in this city, at that time perhaps the most beautiful and wealthy city of the Western world. He frequented the great churches, Santa Maria Novella, the Dominican shrine, and Santa Croce, its Franciscan counterpart. Part of the Duomo was built, although Brunelleschi's magnificent dome did not yet crown it. This period had seen his development into a major poetic figure among the group of Florentine poets who celebrated their allegiance to the god of love, Amore, the presiding presence in many of their poems. Dante's own poetry in this mode is well represented by perhaps his most famous sonnet in praise of his lady, Beatrice.
Tanto gentile e tanto onesta pare la donna mia quand'ella altrui saluta, ch'ogni lingua de ven tremando muta, e gli occhi non l'ardiscon di guardare. Ella si va, sentendosi laudare, benignamente d'umiltà vestuta, e par che sia una cosa venuta da cielo in terra a miracol mostrare. Mostrasi sì piacente a chi la mira, che dà per gli occhi una dolcezza al core, che intender non la può chi non la prova, e par che della sua labbia si mova un spirito soave, pien d'amore, che va dicendo all'anima sospira.
When he was about 27, he gathered 31 of his poems into a collection that he called The New Life, in which these poems were surrounded by prose commentaries supplied by the author himself. Never before had a work of such devising been offered to a public. Its novelty consisted not only in its unheard-of form, but in its message. For where all who had preceded him had proclaimed that their lady was special, none had suggested, as Dante does, most evidently in the prose commentary, that his lady is mysteriously but unmistakably a signifier of the presence of Jesus Christ.
If we think with discernment and veracity about the matter, she and the number 9 are one and the same, for the number 3 is the root of 9, and if 3 is the sole number multiplied by itself that produces 9, the maker of itself into miracles is threefold, that is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which are 3 and 1. In similar fashion, this lady was accompanied in her life by the number 9, that is, a miracle, whose root is the miraculous Trinity and nothing else.
The radical novelty of the new life is still disquieting to readers today, and Dante was clearly aware of his daring in this endeavor. Its concluding lines are,
"If it be the pleasure of him in whom all things take their being, that my life last some years longer, I hope to say of her that which has not before been said of any woman."
That promise would wait some 15 years until Dante began to fulfill it. His comedy would be presented as the final praise of his lady. But now there were concerns in his life that drew him in other directions. Florence, like many Italian city-states, was torn during the latter half of the 13th century by political wars between Guelphs, supporters of the papacy, and Ghibellines, supporters of the Holy Roman Empire. In 1260, the Guelphs, the party of Dante's family, had been crushed by the Ghibellines. Succeeding battles in the next decade, the time of Dante's birth, brought the Guelphs back into power in Florence, and thus it was that Dante would grow up under favoring circumstances. The year 1300, the first great Jubilee year celebrated by the Catholic Church, proclaimed by Pope Boniface VIII, found Dante at the height of his hopes. Cherished by many of his fellow poets, admired by his fellow citizens, he was elected to a term of office as one of the priors of the city. That service propelled him into still other political tasks. He was sent to Rome the following year to plead on behalf of the Florentine white Guelphs. The Guelphs of Florence had, unable to sustain peace and prosperity, divided along familial rather than political lines into blacks and whites. While he was out of Florence, the whites in the city were betrayed by Charles of Valois, the papal emissary who was supposed to serve as peacemaker between the warring factions. The city was sacked by the returning black Guelphs, and those whites who survived were driven from Florence. In January of 1302, the priorate, now controlled by the Black Party, condemned Dante to 2 years of exile. When he later refused to consider buying his way back into citizenship, the severity of his penalty was increased, death by being burned at the stake. His property was confiscated. He would never see his wife or some of his children again. The signs of the exile are everywhere in the works that Dante wrote after 1302. A treatise on vernacular poetry, a lengthy philosophical discourse, both left unfinished, a theoretical consideration of the rights of the emperor in relation to those of the church, and his comedy. During the rest of his life, he moved from city to city in the north of Italy. It was perhaps in Verona or in Lucca that he began writing the comedy, in Ravenna that he finished it. As he wrote, he would learn how salt was the taste of another man's bread, how hard a thing it is to go down and climb up another man's stairs. And from the distance, there was always the call of home. As he nears the completion of his poem, he thinks again of the baptistry, now as the possible site of the poetic laureation he was never to receive.
If it ever comes to pass that the sacred poem, to which both heaven and earth have set their hand, should overcome the cruelty that locks me out of the sweet sheepfold where I slept as a lamb, with another voice then, with another fleece, poet shall I return, and at the font of my baptism take the laurel crown.
As painful as the exile must have been, we, who because of it possess one of the great poems ever written, must see it as a sorrow mitigated by growth. The poet turned theoretician, turned philosopher, turns finally into the poet we know. Sometime around 1307, he began writing his comedy, the work that was destined, as indeed its writer hoped, to elevate the Italian vernacular to a status previously reserved for the classical literary languages, Latin and Greek.
Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura, che la diritta via era smarrita. Ahi, quanto a dir qual era e cosa dura esta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte, che nel pensier rinnova la paura.
It is in the first canto that we discover, to our thoroughly understandable amazement, that the guide in this most Christian of poems is the Roman and pagan poet Virgil, author of the Aeneid. When Virgil reveals himself to Dante, the younger poet is nearly overcome with emotion.
Oh, are you, then, that Virgil, and that source which pours forth so broad a river of speech? You are my master, and you are my author. You alone are the one from whom I took the noble style that has brought me honor.
It is the first cantica of the poem, the Inferno, which many take as the most Dantean part of the work. In the popular imagination, the comedy tends to be thought of primarily as representing the state of the damned in hell. Yet 2/3 of the poem are devoted to those who are saved, whether the souls who are still cleansing themselves of the traces of their wrongful affection on the mountain of purgatory, or those who already dwell in the joy of the grace of God in paradise. Still, the power the damned have to move us is understandable. While many of them are portrayed as horrific, making it easy for us to feel the antipathy that the poem's theology calls for, others are so utterly human in their plight that many readers fail to see the way in which the text nonetheless condemns them. Francesca da Rimini was given in a prearranged marriage to the elder son of a powerful family. The story has it that Gianciotto, the crippled bridegroom-to-be, was represented at the betrothal by his handsome younger brother, Paolo. A perhaps inevitably tragic tale of adulterous passion was the result. When we listen to the concluding speech of Francesca, imprisoned with her lover in the circle of lust for eternity, it is difficult not to sympathize with her.
There is no greater sorrow than to remember times of happiness and wretchedness, and this your teacher knows. But if you are so keen to learn the first root of our love, then I shall speak as one who weeps and speaks. One day, to pass the time away, we read of Lancelot and how love drove him on. We were alone, without the least misgiving. More often than once that story caused our eyes to meet, our faces to grow pale. But one point only it was that overcame us. When we read that the yearned-for smile was kissed by so illustrious a lover, this man, who never shall be parted from me, trembling all over, kissed me on my mouth. A pander was that book, and he who wrote it. That day, we read in it no further.
Pathos is not the only emotion Dante knows how to draw out of us. With evident recourse to Ovid's world of metamorphosed shapes, he portrays the thieves, whose sin calls to mind Eve's and Adam's transgression in the Garden of Eden.
As I stood staring at them, a reptile with 6 legs propelled itself at one of them and got a grip on him. It grabbed his belly with its middle claws. Then with its 4 paws it secured his arms and bit him on both cheeks. It stretched its hind feet downward to the other's thighs, thrusting its tail between them and curling it up behind over the buttocks. Never to a tree did clinging ivy fix itself so fast as that fierce beast entwined itself around the other's limbs. Then they fused together as if made of molten wax.
And it is pathos that we feel again in one of the comedy's most celebrated speeches, that of Ulysses, who reports how he exhorted his men to make their final voyage.
O brothers, who after 100,000 perils now have reached the west, to such brief waking of our senses as remains, do not deny yourselves experience, following the sun, of the unpeopled world. Set your minds to how your souls were sown. You were not made to live as brute beasts live, but to pursue valor and understanding. I made my companions with this short speech so eager for the voyage that I hardly could have held them back. Then, having turned our stern toward the sunrise, for our mad flight we turned our oars to wings, constantly following a southerly course. 5 times rekindled, and 5 times put out, we had seen the shining nether side of the moon, when we sighted a mountain, dim, dim, down in the distance. And to me, it seemed higher than any I had ever seen before. We took joy in that, but soon it turned to tears. For out of that unknown land there came a whirlwind that hit the ship head on. 3 times it turned her, and the waters with her. At the 4th, our stern reared up, the prow went down, another willed it, until the ocean closed back in above us.
Ulysses, like Francesca, had trespassed. Dante allows his sinners to speak for themselves, expecting us to listen with care and distance, to understand the deceptions which they have practiced upon others and ultimately upon themselves. The imperial vicar of the kingdom of the damned is Satan, frozen in the river Cocytus, presented as mimicking the triune God and conceived by Dante's contemporary, the painter Giotto, in similar terms.
If he was fair as he is hideous now, and raised his brow in scorn of his Creator, he is fit to be the source of every sorrow. Ah, how astounding it appeared to me when I perceived 3 faces on his head, all 3 joined together at the crown. Beneath each face 2 mighty wings emerged, such as were suited to so vast a bird. Sea-going sails I never saw so massive. They had no feathers on them, but were fashioned like a bat's wings, wafting in such a way as to raise 3 winds, and these iced Cocytus over. Out of 6 eyes he wept, and his 3 chins dripped tears and drooled blood-red saliva.
From this point, the center of gravity in Dante's universe, the protagonist and his guide travel up within the earth to reach the shore of purgatory. The Mount of Purgatory was situated, in a tradition that Dante inherited, at the other side of the world from Jerusalem. According to him, its summit, on which is situated the Garden of Eden, is the highest point on the terrestrial globe. In order to reach that height, the redeemed sinner must traverse 7 terraces, each of which is devoted to the purgation of one of the 7 capital sins. One of the first scenes we see in this part of the poem records the arrival of a ship, piloted by an angel from heaven, filled with souls arriving at the shore of the mountain, like pilgrims come to the Holy Land.
We were along the sea strand still, like those who have the thought of going forth, who with their hearts move, but stay in body, when, and oh, may I see it again, I saw a light skim so swiftly above the waters that nothing flies with comparable motion. At last the angel put in to the shore, his vessel so swift, so light upon the waves, that the water drew in none of it. And with a single voice the spirits sang, when out of Egypt Israel came.
The trip up the mountain, which takes Dante and Virgil 4 days, often reminds the traveler of vistas in Italy, at times colored by his moral and political convictions.
To the right there lies a road that climbs the hill where over Rubicante stands the church that overlooks the badly governed city. The bold surge of the rise is there reined in by a stairway that was hewn in better days.
On the Terrace of Pride, a sin that Dante confesses as his own, he encounters Odorizio of Gubbio, illuminator of manuscripts, doing penance for the sin of pride in his talent as an artist.
Oh, said I to him, are you not Odorizzi, who bring Gubbio honor, and bring honor to that art they call in Paris illumination?
Brother, the pages touched by brushstrokes of Franco of Bologna smile more brightly. The honor is all his now, if mine in part. I would not have been as generous as this while yet I lived. So urgent was my need to excel. Yes, that was where my heart was. For such pride as this, here the debt gets paid. How empty the glory of mortal genius. How briefly stays the green upon the tip. Cimabue, in painting, thought he held the field. Now Giotto's is the name on every tongue. Just so has the one Guido robbed the other of the glory of our speech. And he perhaps is born who'll drive the one and the other from the nest. Earthly renown is but a puff of wind. Now it blows from here and now from there, changing name because it changes quarter.
At the top of the mountain, having completed what must be understood as a rehearsal for his eventual purgation, Dante enters the Garden of Eden.
Eager now to explore the divine forest, luxuriant and dense, that dimmed the glare of morning on my eyes, at once I left the river bank, moving slowly over the forest floor, everywhere fragrant. A breeze, sweet and steady, touched my brow with no greater force than the gentle wind softly bending the branches of the trees. Among the leaves, the birds were welcoming with lilting song the first breath of the morning, which made such harmony for their melody as gathers and swells from branch to branch through the pine wood near the shore at Chiasi.
And it is here that Virgil, having completed his guidance of Dante in the correction and perfection of his will, yields to Beatrice, who, helping him to correct his intellectual errors, will serve as his guide for most of the rest of the journey. It is now 10 years after her premature death. She reappears to Dante as a blessed soul descended from heaven.
I felt the power of a long-held love and turned to say to Virgil, "There's not an ounce of blood that's left in me that is not trembling. Now I too know the signs of the ancient flame." But Virgil had left us bereft of him, Virgil, dearest of fathers, Virgil to whom I gave myself for my salvation.
Dante, weep not because Virgil is leaving. Weep not. There is another wound will make you weep. Consider me well. I am, indeed I am, Beatrice. What daring led you on to climb the mountain? Did you not know that here we are in bliss?
The arrival of Beatrice signals the conclusion of the second cantica. She first rebukes Dante for his attachment to earthly things. Then, it is under her guidance that Dante will visit paradise.
The glory of the one who moves all things permeates the universe and is reflected in one part more and in another less. I was in the heaven that most draws his light, and I have seen such things as he who returns from there knows not, nor has he power to tell them if he did. For by drawing near to what it longs for, our mind has gone so deep, remembrance cannot make the voyage back. Nevertheless, as much of the Holy Kingdom as I could store as treasure in my mind, hereon shall be the matter of my song.
In the moon, the first of the heavenly spheres, Dante learns from the saved soul of Piccarda Donati, sister of one of his most hated enemies, that no one in heaven envies anyone else a greater proximity to God.
It is the essence of our blessed being to keep within the bounds of God's own will, so that our wills resolve themselves to one. This gives joy to all the ranks, and to the King who moves our wills to what he wills. And it is in his will we find our peace.
And in the sphere of Mars, his ancestor, the crusader Cacciaguida, makes plain Dante's mission as poet.
As Hippolytus was forced to go from Athens, just so will you be driven out of Florence, having to leave behind everything you love most dearly. Thereafter, you will come to know how salt is the taste of another man's bread, and what a troublesome journey it is to go down and climb up another man's stairs. On conscience darkened with its own or other's shame, your words will fall as bitterness. No matter. Having first cast all untruth aside, set down plainly everything you've seen. Then let anyone who itches learn to scratch.
Of the poem's two concluding visions, the first looks back down to earth from the starry sphere.
Back through the 7 spheres I turned my eyes until I saw our globe. To me it seemed so paltry to behold I had to smile, and that opinion I applaud as best which holds it least. for only he whose thoughts lie elsewhere can be considered just. Thus all the 7 spheres were shown to me, their size, their speed, their distance from each other, and the threshing floor that makes us all so fierce.
And then the poem comes to rest in the vision of God.
O abundant grace, letting me presume to fix my sight along the eternal beam until my seeing was consumed in it. In its depth, I saw that it contained, bound up by love into a single volume, all that is scattered through the universe, substance, accident, the interplay between them, as if fused together, so that what I describe is undivided light. Then I saw 3 circlings in that light, equal in size, but each of different hue, and each one seemed reflected by the others, as rainbow by rainbow, and the third seemed fire, painted with the image of our likeness.
All'alta fantasia qui mancò possa, ma già volgeva il mio disio e il velle, sì come rota ch'igualmente è mossa l'amor che move il sole e l'altre stelle.